How you doing? All right. Now, you know the distinction between a press conference and making ourselves available. One, we promise you news, and the other, we just meet with you.
This is the latter.
This is just an update because we've had a lot of contretemps over the last week, and we've had some tough discussions. But I can tell you that the Democrats in both the Senate and in the Assembly have now joined with the administration and myself, and we have a very good plan going forward for the budget. It has to be debated, has to be voted, but as far as the leadership is concerned, we have come to some very important conclusions after a series of tough talks. I do want to say, because I know you have a few questions on this, and we'll get into it more after the budget is passed, but revenues actually are up $4 billion so far this year. That's actual money in hand over and above what we thought. Now, going forward, we do expect more revenues in the budget year coming up, but in case we're over-optimistic, we have severe trigger cuts that will be triggered and go into effect, and those are real. So we've made some very tough cuts in this budget. It's $650 million to the university, $650 million to Cal State, significant cuts, hundreds of millions to the judiciary, and all along the line. So we've made tough decisions. It's a good budget, but it's not the budget that I started with in January and the Democratic leadership wanted. And that was a budget that had revenue. We still have our wall of debt hanging out there. We still have work to do. And given the fact that so far I can't get any Republican support, at least sufficient for a two-thirds vote, we're going to have to look very seriously at an initiative to generate the revenue to create the financial stability that was available last March, but which was rejected by the other party. Darrell, do you want to?
Thank you, Governor. Thank you, Speaker Perez. As the Governor indicated, we have reached an agreement on a budget that is balanced and protects to the greatest extent possible education, the economy, jobs, and the California way of life. The budget implements more than $12 billion in harsh real cuts, in addition to the possibility of an additional $2.6 billion in cuts as part of the trigger. But it does so in a way that puts us on a path to eliminate within the next 18 months a structural deficit that has plagued California for a decade. This budget is the most austere fiscal blueprint California has seen in more than a generation. Spending levels are at historic lows, and every sector of society will feel the difficult choices we've made to bring the budget into balance. Earlier this year, the governor asked both Democrats and Republicans to get out of their comfort zones and to do what was best for California. For Democrats, that meant agreeing to billions of dollars of cuts to vital programs that are essential to children, to the elderly, to the sick, and to the poor, and to our economy. We delivered in March, and we're delivering again in June with billions more in cuts, particularly, again, if revenue falls short of projections. Unfortunately, we were forced to deliver alone, and we used all the tools available to us under the Constitution to do just that, deliver. Finally, as the governor indicated, the imperative for revenue is as great as before because there is still a structural deficit. And we move on now to November of 2012 in the initiative process to get that part of the job done. Speaker?
Thank you. This has clearly been one of the more memorable budget processes in recent memory. And we began with a commitment to say that 2011 would be the year that we stopped reacting to the Great Recession and began building our way out of it. The budget agreement that we've reached brings us much closer to that objective. We will pass a comprehensive on-time budget that closes the remainder of the deficit for this year and eliminates more than 75% of the structural deficit going forward. This agreement is consistent with the framework that the governor laid out in January, and it's also consistent with the legislative analyst recommendation that we take a multi-year approach to close the deficit. It's the combinations of the actions we took in March, the actions we'll take this week, and the anticipation of revenues in the coming year as we go to the ballot. And most importantly, this budget agreement will not cause massive job losses that threaten our economic recovery. We've cast some very difficult votes, but we need to get control of our finances if we're going to be able to make the kind of long-term investments that are necessary to rebuild our shattered economy and prepare the workforce for the 21st century economic industries like green manufacturing and biotechnology. While this agreement does not call for a special election this year, we have not wavered in our belief that new revenues are essential for a balanced, comprehensive solution to our structural deficit. Republican legislators stonewalled the process for months, and as a result will not be having a special election this year. However, the conversation has been started, and we will keep that conversation going as we move to the ballot next year.
One other thing I also want to emphasize, this fully funds the realignment plan, and that's another key aspect that we're getting here. And we're not selling these state buildings that we have to use. Okay, we'll take a few questions.
From what the gentleman said, that this is not going to wind up with a balance in June 30th, 2012. There's going to be some sort of carryover deficit or something that you talked about a multi-year plan.
No, what we have is we have a balanced budget, but some of the things are one time, so they're not ongoing. That means so next year we have to deal with the problem again. But instead of dealing with a $20 billion deficit, we're looking more like $5 billion. So we made dramatic progress, but we're not out of the woods. And there's a gap in our ongoing spending. So you can cut it in various ways that'll take care of it for this year, but next year you have to confront it again, and that's why we need revenues, and we need revenues to pay down the accumulated debts that we've built up over the last decade.
You say that you have $4 billion more this year. Are you projecting?
Already we've got $4 billion, and we're projecting another $4 over the whole period. Over the next 12 months. And we think that's reasonable, but if it doesn't turn out to be true, we're going to cut serious cuts there of almost about $2.5 billion.
Because the bankers won't float your rands without triggers?
No, we're doing triggers. We want to have a credible budget here. And
the triggers?
The triggers are about schools, about school days. They're about... there was some other... Look, you'll get briefed on it. I don't want to give you all the details.
We're going to have a briefing.
They're not cuts the Democrats like to make, I'll tell you that.
Can you tell us you've been on your Plan A since
Yes.
January? This is obviously not your Plan A.
Right, Plan A...
When was the moment you said, we got to do something else? When?
I guess when I got my last text message last night, and then a couple more from the same individual.
And
well, I mean, we got it.
from whom?
Well, we talked, many of the Republicans talked to us, a rather small group. It shrunk as we went along, but at the end of the day, there was just not a willingness to sign on to the extensions, no matter what we did. And I have to say, the pension proposals were proposed and written by my administration. So was the cap, and so was the CEQA reform. There was an idea that came from the Republicans on regulatory reform that was rather vast and complicated that we never fully finished. There were a number of other items that all are now tabled. But we had some very serious discussions. I thought we were getting close, but as I look back on it, there is a almost religious reluctance to ever deal with the state budget in a way that requires new revenues. And because Governor Schwarzenegger got rid of the vehicle license fee and then backfilled local government to the tune of about $7 billion a year, that is a structural deficit. Without revenues, will never be closed. So, look, we had some good discussions, but to tell you the truth, they walked out and they wouldn't, when they say, there's going to be a lot of who walked out first, but let me tell you this. There has never been, yes, I will vote for a tax extension, and now, yes, I will vote for a bridge and a tax extension from 2 votes in the Assembly and 2 votes in the Senate. We just don't have them.
You know, Obviously, that's a good question, but frankly, for myself, I'm a little tired of talking about the gang that chooses not to govern. I'd prefer to talk about the work of the majority party here, working with the governor, that came to a budget resolution that makes deep cuts and that, as the speaker said a moment ago, reduces the deficit by 3/4. They've had every opportunity, will continue to have every opportunity to choose to govern in a fair, balanced, and responsible way. If they continue to do what they've done for the last 6 months that the governor has experienced, we're going to continue to govern this state.
Let me just make one clarification, just to be very clear. We reduced the structural deficit by 75%. We completely balance the budget for the year.
Right.
So there is no carryover deficit. The only thing that you start with is the structural deficit that we reduced by 75%, and that's why this is a multi-year approach. It gives us the opportunity to work at reducing the remaining part of the structural deficit next year, both through legislative action and through a ballot measure to bring in the needed revenues. Those revenues will help us eliminate the remaining percentage of the structural deficit and then pay down the wall of debt that the governor has talked about. That is an incredibly important action for us to get our economic house in order. So we know that there's much work
By
to
the
do
way,
on
when
that
we
front.
talk about, I just want to and then I don't want to get into more detail because we'll be, after the budget is passed and signed, we'll go into much greater detail. But if you take something that has one time, for example, hundreds of millions of dollars of court buildings, and then, okay, we're not going to build them for a year, that actually saves several $100 million. But then in the next year, you have to find similar savings to balance the budget. And that's why we need new revenues, because even though we can balance the budget in a year, to really put California on a firm glide path where the spending and the revenue out into the longer future is absolutely balanced. That does take revenue. So the legislature did a hell of a job. They don't like making these cuts, and they don't like those trigger cuts that will go into effect if needed. So we do need the revenue, but I think they did a hell of a job, and I'm glad to be with them.
Do you have the Democratic
That you have to ask
Yes.
these experts.
Because, I mean, many have voiced their opinion about not wanting to go deeper on cuts, and so will they go along with this? This is pretty risky.
As we do consistently, both the speaker and I will deliver our votes.
Thank you.
Proposition 98, the school budget?
Very legally and creatively.
Well, then, you find a big one.
Okay.